everyone, I'm Stephanie Weaver. Welcome back to the Blue and Yellow Kitchen. In each episode, I make a dish inspired by a new book while talking to its author. Today's book is The Kindest Lie, and I'm making candied yams. I'd like to welcome Nancy Johnson, author of The Kindest Lie, to the Blue and Yellow Kitchen. Hi, Nancy.
Hi, Stephanie. It's great to be here.
Well, we're so excited about your brand new book. Tell everybody what the book's about. Give us the overview.
Sure. The Kindest Lie is a story of family, sacrifice, and love, all of it at the intersection of race and class at the dawn of the Obama era. And the book centers on a woman named Ruth Tuttle. She's a Black chemical engineer, very successful, Ivy League educated, and on the come up. She's got a great husband, great house, everything's going her way. But she's been harboring a secret. She gave birth to a baby when she was just 17 years old, and she left him behind in the dying Indiana factory town where she grew up. So she decides to go back to her hometown to search for her son. And of course, when she gets there, a lot of things have changed. The auto plant, which was the beating heart of that town, has now closed, and a lot of people are out of work, including her own brother. And when she reunites with her brother and her grandmother, she learns that they've been keeping some secrets from her as well. And also, when she gets back to her hometown, she meets and forms this unlikely connection with a young white boy nicknamed Midnight. And he's mired in the very poverty that Ruth managed to escape. And so when the two of them get together, it puts them on this collision course of race and class, and both of their lives are upended.
That was a fantastic overview. There's a couple questions I won't need to ask you because you did such a thorough job of explaining the book, which is awesome. But tell us what inspired you to write it, and how did you choose the setting of a little bit of Chicago, but mostly this small Indiana town, which, by the way, is where Michael White Boy is from. He's from small Indiana towns, and I grew up 15 years in Chicago. So I related to the book for a couple of reasons. But why did you choose the setting? Why did you choose the time period?
Sure. Well, I'm from Chicago, and I live in Chicago. So I think the Chicago setting was a natural one. And also, I was inspired by the campaign and election of Barack Obama as president back in 2008. And of course, Obama is a native son of Chicago. And, we had the big election night victory party for Obama here, at Grant Park. And so all of that really speaks to the Chicago part of the story. But what really connected me with this idea was that this was such a time of hope for so many people in America, particularly Black America, but I think a lot of people, of various races and ethnicities, no matter what your political persuasion is, people thought that we had achieved a certain degree of progress, and that was very important. But at the same time, I knew that we weren't in a post-racial era, because so many people said, oh, we've solved the race problem now that we've got a Black president. But I knew there was this deep divide between Black and white communities. I saw it playing out on my social media feed. Facebook was just really getting going back then. And so it was really getting ugly there. And I really wanted to show the stark divide. And I thought, okay, this is a time of economic strain for many people. And also, I wanted to set the book in a place where you could see it very clearly, the struggles of people economically and the divide. And so that's why I thought of a factory town where the auto plant has just been shuttered. And also, we don't see a lot of books set in the Midwest and in Indiana, so it seemed like a perfect place to set the novel.
That's true, and certainly there is a bias with big publishers on the East Coast for that the stories tend to be centered in the East Coast, and yet so much of America does not live on the East Coast. So I agree.
The East Coast or the West Coast.
Yeah,
one or the other. Yeah.
Absolutely, and I love stories that are set in other places. And certainly I read this book last fall, long before it was on, 10 must-read list, which it's on now. So we're very excited to see how the book has launched because, it's really been so many people are heralding it, which is great for you and great for the story. I chose it because I felt like, certainly after 2020 and the Black Lives Matter movement, there was a lot of people kind of registering, a lot of white people registering that, oh wait, we didn't fix racism, which any Black person would have told you we didn't. But that the idea of that we were sort of post-racial with Obama, and then there was this huge backlash with the following administration. And So I thought, there's something about fiction that can bring some of those ideas really to life, where you become attached to those characters and you really feel for those characters in a way that if you're seeing an event, something that happens on the news, maybe it's a little bit more removed. I also, as I said, from the time I was 20 until I was 35, I lived in Chicago. And your character's experience of Chicago is very different than mine because I lived in white Chicago and she lives in black Chicago. So it was helpful for me to see the setting from that very different perspective, even though I was very familiar with some of the locations that are talked about in the book. And then that whole idea of class struggle and upward mobility, I think, is a really rich and meaty area for fiction. So thank you so much for writing this.
Of course, I do think that characters in story help us to get to some of those issues that are harder to talk about, because after all of the protests from 2020 and, the killings of George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, you had a lot of people, particularly white people, doing their anti-racism reading. And most of that reading was nonfiction. But I think, like you said, fiction is such a great entry point to help us have some of those difficult conversations, because we can talk about it through character and story.
Yeah, and part of the goal for this show is to bring those difficult conversations to a super non-threatening place, which is the kitchen counter and kitchen table, and to talk about some of these things, because we all eat and we all love food. So that's a perfect segue. So the recipe I'm making today is inspired, for candied yams, is inspired by Nancy's family recipe. She and I talked about it. She explained how her family makes candied yams. She even sent me a photo so I could tell what they were supposed to look like when they were finished. And I chose that specific recipe because The Kindest Lie is centered on the time period between Thanksgiving and Christmas of 2008. And this dish is mentioned in two pivotal scenes, one of which Nancy's going to read a portion of. I've asked her to read that for us in a moment. And while she's reading, let's see if I can bring the story to life with these candied yams, and we'll talk about the recipe after she finishes reading. So Nancy, can you set up what you're about to read for us and then go ahead and read?
Sure. So yeah, like you said, a lot of these tough conversations do happen at the dinner table. And so at this moment, we've got Ruth, my main character, and Xavier, her husband, and they've just finished their Thanksgiving meal. And, it's now time to put the food away, put the dishes away, and they're having one of these difficult conversations. And Xavier is pretty upset because he wants to start a family with her, but she's very reluctant and is dragging her feet, not wanting to do so. And so it's creating some tension and conflict between them now after they've finished dinner. So I'll read this section to you now. She hadn't seen her husband this angry since their engagement, when he'd asked to meet Mama and Eli to get to know them and receive their blessing for the impending marriage. When Ruth had dodged his request as long as she could, she eventually flat out refused, and Xavier assumed she was ashamed of him and likely had no intention to marry. Every time her bond with Xavier had stretched thin enough to break, it was because of her grand attempts to keep her worlds separate, to protect the lie of her past at all costs, even if that cost included her husband. The truth could serve as a needed relief valve, lowering the pressure inside their marriage before it exploded. She had confessed to him about unpaid parking tickets and finally told him that his famous foot rubs were more ticklish than tantalizing. But this was different. The birth of her baby seemed to have happened in another lifetime, to another person even. What did a wife owe her husband? How much retroactive truth-telling could be expected? For what seemed like an eternity, Xavier scrubbed the same dish over and over in silence, just the way Mama used to when she couldn't figure out what else to do with her emotions. She wanted to see his eyes. She needed to see them. She needed him to at least look at her. She knew he wouldn't as long as she kept silent. In a small voice, Ruth spoke, unsure at first whether she'd said the words aloud or only in her head. "You're right, I've been lying to you." When his hands stilled in the dishwater, she knew he'd heard her. Without turning to face her, he said, "I'm listening." Hail battered the windows of their townhouse, and the wind roared. Ruth sank into the closest kitchen chair. Xavier dried his hands and sat down opposite her. There was no easy way to begin a story that was years past its due date, 11 years to be exact. I was 17. My senior year in high school, I messed up badly. His name was Ronald Atkins. She rubbed her hands together in her lap, her mouth going bone dry when she spoke her old boyfriend's name aloud. Xavier had no way of knowing what she'd say next, but he recoiled on instinct. Maybe it had been the way she'd avoided his eyes when she said her ex's name, or maybe it was just the sting of hearing another man's name on his wife's tongue before a confession. I got pregnant.
Ooh, that was awesome. So
now everybody's got to read to find out what happened.
Everybody's got to read, and I also just noticed the secret was years past its due date. That was a beautiful little touch there with the pregnancy.
The pregnancy and due date.
Yeah, very nice. So I'm going to show off the candied yams.
Okay.
And then show them to Nancy to make sure that she approves. How those look?
Yeah, those look great.
Okay, good. So
those look great. I haven't put the nutmeg on yet.
Yeah, I haven't put the nutmeg on yet. So Nancy's family uses ground nutmeg, and you just kind of sprinkle it across once you put them in the serving dish. Is that right?
Right.
Okay,
That's what we do after they're already ready.
After they're all ready. So what I mentioned to her was that one of the things that I've really loved about learning about spices is that whole nutmeg, ground nutmeg, which looks like this, is actually really incredible and aromatic, and they're not terribly expensive to buy one, and they kind of last forever. And you just take a fine grater like this, or the fine side of a box grater, or if you have a microplane zester, and then you just grate it across the top, and you just get this really lush floral scent that comes out when you freshly grated it that I just find just absolutely fantastic. So I don't know if you can smell that across the kitchen there, microwave boy, but boy, it's just like this.
I can imagine the smell.
This perfume just comes up off the plate, and then I'm going to go ahead and taste one. They're so yummy.
Are they okay? Good.
They're delicious. And so one of the things that if you ever had one of those, and if your family makes it with the marshmallows, that's totally fine. Like, I'm not dissing anybody's candied yam dish.
We don't use the marshmallows.
But for me, it's too much sugar. It's too sweet, and because sweet potatoes have so much sweetness on their own. So this is just a nice little addition of sweetness. I love the buttery flavor, and then the nutmeg just really brings out the richness of the sweet potato. And then the other question that we had was, are these yams or are these sweet potatoes? So I did some research, and it turns out that they are sweet potatoes. So when you, pretty much any vegetable that you buy in the U.S., unless you're at a specialty market, is a sweet potato, even if it's labeled a yam. And so those are thin skin. They can be orange, deep orange, yellow, or white inside. A yam is actually a Caribbean tuber that has a rough, kind of hairy bark, and it's white inside, and it's very, very starchy. So they need to be boiled for a long time or stewed, and then often they're mashed. So completely different botanical tuber. It's just that in the 30s, there was a company, I think in South Carolina, that started marketing them as yams, and so that kind of the name kind of stuck. But they actually are sweet potatoes.
No, okay. That's great to have that history on it, because I think our family uses those terms interchangeably, sweet potatoes and candied yams.
Yeah, most people do, and I actually didn't know, so I had to look it up. So I learned something too, which is always fun. Yeah. So this is a side dish. So what else would Ruth and Xavier have eaten with this candied yam dish? What else would have been on the table?
Yeah, so at this Thanksgiving meal, they also had honey baked ham, which is something that my family eats all the time. Sometimes we bake our own ham, but the honey baked ham is also just as good and less work. But so they had honey baked ham, and then they had broccolini as well. And then I know in another scene with Mama does a lot of cooking. That's Ruth's grandmother. So there are quite a few food scenes there. And so I know they would be eating the sweet potatoes there as well, with fried chicken. That's something that she fries in buttermilk. And then also serving creamed corn or fried corn and mashed potatoes. So at least in my family, and I would say also in the Tuttle family, they don't mind having two different potatoes.
Sure.
Love our starches, I guess. And so have mashed potatoes, green beans, but also have sweet potatoes as well.
Fantastic. So Nancy, before we go, is there anything else you want readers to know about your book?
I think the main thing is that, we've talked about these issues of race and class that are definitely present and very much in the heart of this particular story. But I would say at its heart, this is a family story. It's a story about family and love. And I just want people to be entertained by it too, and to just fall into the journey with these characters. And I think people will definitely relate to the characters. I mean, the best part of publishing this book has been hearing from readers. And I actually, speaking of food, heard from a woman who said that her ancestry is that her grandmother is Jewish and Belgian. And she said, oh my God, everything that Mama in the book was cooking is just like what my grandmother cooked, even though her grandmother is not Black. And she said, she would make that hot water cornbread, and she would have that can of bacon drippings on the back of the stove, and that so much was very similar. And that just amazed me, that there's so much universality when it comes to story and when it comes to food.
Absolutely. And one of my goals post-pandemic is to get invited to a Black Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner, because I really want to just have the experience of having all that food on the table. It sounds amazing, yes. So Nancy, thank you so much for being here today. It was wonderful to have you in the kitchen. You'll find the recipe link in the Facebook video or on my website, mygrainreliefrecipes.com. You can learn more about Nancy at nancyjohnson.net. And if you enjoyed the show, please share it with a friend. Order a copy of The Kindest Lie wherever you like to buy books, and you can also support authors if you don't have a book buying budget by asking your local library to order their book. That also really helps authors. Follow me at sweavermph so you don't miss an episode, and join us next time for another author interview and a dish inspired by their book. Thanks so much for watching The Blue and Yellow Kitchen.